Your house is my baby's now. Are you sure about that?
Just sign the papers.
You should read them first.
She has nothing left.
The house was never his.
What do you mean?
Sign the papers and stop standing in the way of our baby. Those were the first words my husband's pregnant mistress said to me at the divorce conference. She spoke them across a polished walnut table on the 42nd floor of a downtown Chicago law office in front of a retired judge, 2 attorneys, a legal assistant, and my husband, Ethan Caldwell, who was still wearing the silver watch I had gifted him the day he was promoted to regional vice president at Hyen Therapeutics. Sloan Mercer sat beside him, dressed in a cream-colored gown that clung to the slight curve of her stomach. She kept one hand resting protectively over her belly, while the other gripped a glass of sparkling water. Her blonde hair fell over one shoulder in a perfect, calculated cascade. Her engagement finger was bare, but her triumphant smile already looked like she owned every single thing that had once belonged to my life. My home and my heart. My house, my husband, my future. Even my own humiliation. I sat across from them with the proposed divorce settlement lying open before me and a black fountain pen held between my fingers. I did not shake. That stillness seemed to disappoint her immensely. My client is not preventing anyone from having a child. My attorney, Denise Harper, said with a calm, steady voice that cut through the thick tension in the room. We are here to review the financial disclosures and discuss the division of marital property. Denise continued. Sloan leaned back, eyes flickering. Of course. I just think some women have trouble accepting when a marriage has already ended. Ethan stared down at the table. That hurt more than her words. He had spent 9 years promising that he would defend me against anyone in the world. Yet here I was, standing alone, even when the woman carrying what he believed was his child insulted me in public. He just studied the wood grain as though it required his full concentration. The retired judge acting as mediator finally removed his glasses. Miss Mercer, you are not a party to this divorce. I will ask you not to interfere, he commanded. I am part of the situation, she replied sharply. You are not part of the legal proceeding. The judge reminded her. Her smile tightened. Ethan finally looked at me. Claire, can we just get through this? His voice carried the exhausted impatience of a man who believed my pain had become nothing more than a tedious administrative inconvenience. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 39 that winter and, until 6 months earlier, I had fully believed my marriage was the absolute foundation of my life. I worked as a corporate attorney at a prominent Chicago firm specializing in high-stakes acquisitions and complex compliance investigations. Ethan managed all the Midwest operations for Hyen Therapeutics, a rapidly growing pharmaceutical company with its main headquarters based out of Boston. From the outside, we looked successful in that comfortable, polished way people trust without examining too closely. We owned a beautiful, renovated brick home in Lincoln Park. We drove sensible luxury cars. We held season tickets to the Chicago Symphony that we actually used 4 times a year, while always pretending to ourselves that we would find the time to use them much more often. We hosted Thanksgiving for both our families. We adopted 2 dogs, Walter and June, after Ethan found them together at a rescue event and declared that separating them would be cruel. For years, that simple story felt like solid proof of his character. A man who refused to separate 2 frightened dogs could not possibly abandon his own wife. That was what I believed. I had mistaken isolated acts of kindness for permanent loyalty. The truth arrived slowly. Ethan started coming home late every Wednesday. At first, he blamed conference calls with Hyen's West Coast team. Then it became mandatory dinners with regional directors, urgent strategy sessions, mysterious product launches, emergencies, and delayed flights from cities he had supposedly visited so often that I could no longer track which excuse belonged to which week. His phone started following him into the shower. He turned it face down during dinner. He changed the lock code after using the same 6 digits for nearly a decade. Then there was the perfume. It was sweet, floral, and young. It clung to the collars of his shirts and the passenger seat of his car. The first time I mentioned it, he just laughed. We test consumer products, Claire. Fragrances get sprayed all over the marketing floor. Hyen sells medication. But we also develop dermatology products. You came from a dinner, not a laboratory. He kissed my forehead as if I were being adorable. You cross-examine people for a living. You do not have to do it at home, he added dismissively. That sentence stayed with me. At work, people paid me to notice inconsistencies. At home, my husband had conditioned me to feel guilty for seeing them. So, I stopped questioning him. I started observing. I checked dates, not messages. I remembered names, not excuses. I noted the nights he came home distant, and the mornings he became unusually affectionate. Guilt always has made him generous. After the worst weeks, flowers appeared on my desk, reservations appeared in my calendar, and jewelry appeared in small velvet boxes. He thought gifts erased patterns. They only confirmed them. The person who finally gave the betrayal a face was my former law school roommate, Maya Chen. She had joined Hyun's legal department 2 years earlier and worked closely with the executive team. One Thursday night, while I was reviewing a contract at home, Maya sent me a message. I saw Ethan at Bevet's with someone from marketing, blonde, late 20s. They were not acting like coworkers. Are you okay? I read it 3 times. Walter was asleep against my foot. June was staring at me from the rug, waiting for the moment when I normally closed my laptop and took them outside. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember the rain tapping against the kitchen windows. I remember thinking that people always imagined heartbreak as something loud and dramatic. Mine was completely silent. It was the sound of every excuse Ethan had given me finally rearranging itself into the absolute truth. The woman's name was Sloane Mercer. She was 28 and had transferred from Hyun's Denver office to Chicago the previous year. Her online life was a carefully edited catalog of discipline and aspiration. Morning workouts, motivational quotes, business class flights, expensive blazers, and captions about refusing to accept less than she deserved. I had met her at Hyzan's holiday party. She had walked up to me near the bar, complimented my dress, and asked how long Ethan and I had been married. Almost 9 years, I said. That is incredible. The way she said, incredible made marriage sound like some dusty, antique achievement. Then she smiled. You are so elegant. Ethan always says you are very established, she noted. At the time, I assumed she was just awkward. Later, I understood that she had been measuring me. She wanted to see whether I looked tired, insecure, or old enough to replace. The following Wednesday, Ethan told me he had a video conference with the San Francisco team. I followed him. I hated myself for doing it. I hated the secrecy, the adrenaline, and the cheapness of sitting in my car in River North while snow gathered on the windshield. But I needed the truth without his carefully crafted interpretation attached to it. He arrived at 7:14. Sloane arrived at 7:21. He met her outside. His hand settled against the small of her back, as naturally as it had settled against mine in hundreds of photographs. Inside the restaurant, they sat in a corner booth. She leaned toward him whenever she laughed. He touched her wrist. At one point, she placed her hand against his cheek, and he closed his eyes. That was the moment my marriage truly ended. Not when they kissed, not when he lied. It ended when I saw the genuine expression on his face. He looked relieved. Being with her felt like an escape from the life we had built together. I drove home before they left. I let Walter and June into the yard, poured a glass of wine, and sat at the kitchen island until Ethan arrived after midnight. He loosened his tie and gave me a tired, practiced smile. San Francisco is a disaster, he claimed. I saw you, I whispered. The smile vanished. He did not ask what I meant. That told me everything I needed to know. Claire, I watched you walk into the restaurant with Sloane, I said. His eyes moved toward the stairs, as though checking whether anyone else could hear us. We lived alone. Shame makes people behave as if betrayal has witnesses, even when it does not. It isn't what you think, he stammered. You had your hand on her back, I retorted. She is just going through a difficult time, he lied. She kissed you, I stated firmly. His shoulders dropped. For a few seconds, he looked like a man considering which lie would require the least effort. Then he stopped pretending. It started a few months ago, he admitted. How many? Does it matter? It matters to me, I replied. He rubbed both hands over his face. About 5 months, he said. During those 5 months, we had celebrated my birthday in Napa Valley. We had attended his sister's wedding. We had discussed renovating the upstairs bathroom. We had met with a financial advisor and increased our retirement contributions. He had continued building our future while privately replacing me inside it. "Do you love her?" I asked. He did not answer quickly enough. "That is not a difficult question." "I care about her," he finally said. "Do you love her?" I repeated. "I do not know what love means anymore." He sighed. I almost laughed. People who betray you often become philosophers when simple words would make them accountable. An affair does not just happen. Ethan, it is chosen. You chose it every time you deleted a message, invented a meeting, or came home and climbed into bed beside me. "I know," he whispered. "No, you know you were caught," I said. His expression hardened. "You have not been happy either," he snapped. There it was. The shared responsibility defense. He listed my long hours, my tendency to bring work home, the weekends I had canceled plans because a client needed me, and the arguments we had postponed instead of resolving. Some of it was true. None of it, explained Sloane. "You could have left," I said. "You could have told me you were lonely. You could have asked for counseling. I tried to talk to you," he insisted. "You complained. You did not confess." I corrected him. "I did not plan this," he argued. "You planned every Wednesday," I replied. He slept in the guest room that night. Within 2 weeks, he had packed his life into a series of cardboard boxes and moved into a sterile, furnished apartment in the West's Loop. To our circle of friends, he painted a narrative of a cooling romance, claiming we were simply taking space. To his parents, he spun a tale of two people who had slowly grown apart over the years. Meanwhile, he told the leadership at Heian absolutely nothing about Sloane, despite the company's strict internal policies requiring all executives to formally disclose any personal relationships with employees whose promotions or compensation they could directly influence. The illusion shattered when I discovered he had personally approved her sudden appointment as the director of regional brand strategy. When I pressed him, he smugly claimed the decision had been made by a committee. But I knew exactly how committees functioned once the most powerful person in the room was determined to force a specific outcome. At that early stage, Ethan still wore the mask of remorse, approaching the divorce process with a faux respectful demeanor that almost convinced me he still felt some shred of dignity. He insisted that he wanted the process to remain civilized and respectful for both our sakes. He even offered to let me keep the Lincoln Park house, promising to continue covering the mortgage payments until we reached a final settlement. But then, Sloane discovered she was pregnant, and the mask slipped completely. Ethan stopped the hollow apologies and began the cold, hard business of negotiation. Suddenly, the house was no longer a home to be shared. It was an asset far too valuable for me to keep, and he wanted it back. Our joint investment accounts became the primary target for his restructuring. He argued that his company stock, which had been rightfully earned throughout our 9 years of marriage, was strictly tied to future performance metrics and therefore should not be considered marital property. His high-priced attorney sent over a proposed settlement that treated our nearly decade-long union like a minor, temporary inconvenience. He dictated that I would only receive the house if I refinanced the entire loan within 60 days and completely waived any claims to 3 significant stock grants worth over $700,000. Under his proposal, Ethan would retain his full retirement accounts, all his company equity, and the West Loop condominium he had quietly placed under contract behind my back. That condominium was the first shock. The second was the discovery that he had secretly siphoned $180,000 from a joint investment account to provide the deposit. When I questioned him, he had the audacity to claim the transfer was just an emergency business investment, a lie so transparent it felt like a personal insult to my intelligence. My forensic accountant tracked the payment to a real estate escrow firm within 48 hours of starting the audit. Once Denise, my attorney, confronted his counsel with the evidence, the story shifted instantly. It was no longer a business investment. Now, it was framed as temporary housing for the baby. That was the precise reason Sloane appeared at our mediation session. She wasn't there for legal support. She was there to make the baby a visible, breathing argument in the room, hoping to tip the scales in their favor. She clearly believed that a pregnant stomach would successfully transform clear financial misconduct into a justifiable family necessity. Ethan hadn't warned me she would be present. I saw the flash of guilt on his face the moment I stepped into the conference room. He looked humiliated, yet he wasn't enough of a man to ask her to leave. Sloane made a calculated performance of discomfort throughout the meeting. She constantly shifted in her chair, requested herbal tea, and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear that the stress was terribly bad for the baby. Whenever the mediator dared to question Ethan's incomplete financial disclosures, Sloane would intervene, speaking directly to me with a sharp, patronizing tone. She claimed the Lincoln Park house was simply too large for one person to occupy. She insisted that children required stability. She even had the nerve to suggest I could easily purchase another property because I had a successful career of my own. The underlying message was unmistakable. I was being pushed out of my own life to make room for her. She did not view me as the woman whose marriage she had helped systematically dismantle. She viewed me solely as a convenient obstacle standing between her and the lavish lifestyle she had carefully selected for herself. When the mediator finally asked whether both sides were prepared to sign the preliminary property agreement, Sloane placed a dramatic hand over her stomach and looked at me with cold eyes, telling me to stop standing in the way of their baby's future. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to guilt me into submission. I looked directly at Ethan, waiting for him to reclaim his integrity. "You brought her here to pressure me," I stated coldly. He muttered that she just wanted to understand the process. "She is not your attorney," I reminded him. "She is carrying my child," he countered. "And I am still your wife," I shot back. Sloane gave a small, sharp laugh, sneering, "Legally." Denise reached out and touched my arm under the table, a silent warning for me to maintain my composure. I didn't need the warning. I was far past the point of losing control. I had spent 14 years of my life watching powerful men destroy their own reputations in conference rooms because they mistook a woman's emotional restraint for weakness. I picked up the pen with a steady hand. Ethan let out a breath, clearly expecting my capitulation. Sloane wore a smug, triumphant smile. Then, I signed only the acknowledgement confirming I had received the proposed agreement, and nothing more. I closed the folder firmly. "I am not accepting this settlement," I declared, watching the air leave the room. Ethan's face turned ashen as the realization hit him. "Clarier, we already discussed this," he stammered. "You discussed it with your attorney," I corrected him. "Then you chose to hide marital funds from me and brought your mistress to intimidate me into a deal." "The money was for housing," he insisted. "The money was marital property," I retorted. "The baby needs a place to live," he argued. "The baby does not need a $1.4 million condominium with a private elevator," I replied. Sloane's cheeks flushed a deep, indignant red. "You have no idea what the baby needs," she snapped. "No," I said, "but I know exactly what you want." She leaned across the table toward me, her voice dripping with venom. "Some women build careers," she sneered, "because they simply could not build families." The room went deathly silent. Ethan whispered her name, not as a reprimand for her cruelty, but as a desperate warning that she had said the quiet part of their affair much too loudly. Sloane knew I had suffered 2 miscarriages, Ethan had told her. He had taken one of the most private, painful wounds of my life and placed it in the hands of a woman who was now using it as a weapon. For the first time all day, my control nearly shattered. I stared at my husband, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Did you tell her?" I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence confirmed everything I had feared about the man I had once loved. I stood up, gathered my documents, and handed the pen back to the legal assistant. "This mediation is over, Claire," Ethan barked. I fixed him with a stare until he finally stopped speaking. Then, I turned to Sloane. "You think being pregnant makes you powerful in this room. It doesn't. It only makes your cruelty visible to everyone here." I walked out before either of them could utter a word. The elevator ride to the lobby took less than a minute, but by the time the doors slid open, my chest felt so tight I could barely draw a breath. Outside, the city of Chicago was being punished by a relentless, freezing rain. Taxis sped past, spraying gray slush across the curb, while office workers hurried by with umbrellas pulled low against the biting wind. I reached the quiet corner of the parking garage and unlocked my car, my hands shaking. "Clarier," a man's voice called from the shadows. I turned, startled. Lucas Grant stood near a concrete column beside my parking space, looking utterly out of place. He had been Ethan's closest friend our college days, and had even stood as the best man at our wedding. He was the kind of person who always remembered birthdays, tipped servers way too generously, and possessed a talent for vanishing the second a conflict required him to actually choose a side. For months, he had sent me polite, careful messages apologizing for how difficult things had become, never once asking for my side of the story. He had never truly asked what Ethan had done to us. Now his face was pale. His expensive coat was soaked through with freezing rain, and he looked terrified. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice guarded. "I knew about the mediation," he murmured. "Did Ethan send you?" I demanded. "No," he said. "Then move." "Claire, please," I told him. "I have nothing to say to you. I need to tell you something about Sloane," he persisted. I reached for my car door, determined to leave. If this is another pathetic request for me to make the divorce easier just because Ethan is becoming a father, you can save your breath, I said. "It isn't that." He stepped closer, then hesitated as if he were afraid I would drive away before he found the right words. "I knew Sloane long before Ethan ever did," he confessed. I stared at him, stunned. "How well did you know her?" Lucas looked toward the garage entrance, gathering his courage, before finally meeting my eyes. "We were sleeping together," he said quietly. The sound of the rain striking the metal ramps above us felt deafening. I felt my entire world narrow down to the sight of his strained face. "When?" "For almost 7 months," he admitted. "It only ended after she started working closely with Ethan at the office." "Does he know?" I asked. "No," he replied. I gripped the car door tightly, my knuckles turning white. "What does any of this have to do with me?" Lucas swallowed hard. "She contacted me after she found out she was pregnant." My burning anger suddenly shifted into something much colder, more analytical. "What did she say?" I asked. He reached inside his coat and pulled out his phone. "She said the dates were complicated," he whispered. "Complicated how?" I asked. "She was still seeing me when she started seeing Ethan," he revealed. I looked at the phone but refused to touch it. Lucas's voice dropped to a barely audible level. "Claire, the baby she claims belongs to your husband may actually belong to me." He unlocked his phone screen and opened a saved message. The photograph displayed a grainy ultrasound. Underneath it, Sloane had typed 2 sentences. "Look at that forehead. It is exactly like yours. Do not tell Ethan yet. I need time to decide which future makes the most sense." Lucas and I ended up at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the garage because neither of us trusted our hands enough to drive safely in our current state of shock. The cafe was packed with people trying to escape the freezing rain. Wet coats hung heavily from the backs of chairs, and the sound of milk steaming behind the counter filled the space. A group of college students argued loudly about an upcoming exam near the window, entirely unaware that the table right beside them held the wreckage of 3 people's lives. Lucas ordered a coffee but never touched it. I kept my coat on, unable to settle. "Start at the beginning," I commanded. He rubbed his palms together nervously. "I met Sloane at a healthcare marketing conference in Austin. That was about 18 months ago," he explained. "She worked for a consulting agency based in Denver." "You were married then," I noted. Lucas looked down at the table. "We were separated," he argued. "That is not the same thing," I told him. I knew his wife. Rebecca had moved to Minneapolis after years of trying to save a marriage. Lucas treated like a room he could walk out of whenever the conversation grew uncomfortable. I had once naively believed that Lucas was a gentler soul than Ethan. I was starting to understand that gentleness, without the courage to take a stand, could produce its own unique kind of damage. "How long did the affair last?" I asked. "About 7 months," he said. "We met whenever I traveled for work, and sometimes she came to Chicago to visit." "Did Ethan know her through you?" "No, I do not think so," he claimed. "She applied to Heian after hearing me talk about the company's expansion," he continued. "I introduced her to a recruiter, not Ethan." That distinction seemed profoundly important to him, but it meant absolutely nothing to me. "When did she begin seeing Ethan?" I asked. "I cannot give you an exact date," he admitted. "She just became less available to me around February. In March, she told me there was someone else," he said. "Ethan had first come home, smelling like her specific perfume in April." The timeline fit together with horrifying ease. "Did you continue seeing her twice while she was with Ethan?" I asked. "I did not know how serious they were," he defended. "You knew she was involved with someone," I pressed. "Yes," he admitted. "And you did it anyway." Yes, he didn't even try to defend himself. That was honestly more than Ethan had managed to do. Lucas opened a folder on his phones and slid it across the table. It was a digital archive of our destruction screenshots, hotel confirmations, photographs, and voice messages. Some had dates from well before Sloane joined Heian. Others were much more recent. A photograph taken in a hotel mirror clearly showed Sloane wearing Lucas's shirt. The date on the file was only 12 weeks earlier. Sloane had told Ethan she was 10 weeks pregnant, but the timeline was a mess of lies. I scrolled to the next image, the ultrasound photograph I had seen earlier. The message beneath it was followed by a reply from Lucas. "Does Ethan know we were together?" he had asked. Sloane had answered. "He knows what he needs to know." Another message appeared 2 days later. "He is thrilled," she wrote, sealing the trap. "He actually thinks this fixes everything." Lucas had written, "What if it is mine?" Her response came just 4 minutes later. "Then we will handle it privately. He does not need to lose a child he already loves." I read the words again, letting them sink into my skin like ice. "What does handle it privately even mean?" I asked her, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, but instead, he reached out and played a recorded audio message from his phone. Sloane's voice filled the small space between us, crisp and chillingly calm. "Lucas, stop panicking. Ethan is stable. He wants the baby. You are still trying to repair things with Rebecca anyway, and you travel constantly. Biology is not the only thing that makes someone a father. Let Ethan believe. What makes everyone's life easier?" The recording ended, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence hanging in the air. The audacity of her calculation made my stomach turn. I handed the phone back with shaking fingers. Lucas looked physically ill, his complexion drained of color. "There is more," he muttered, looking away. "Of course there is," I thought. He showed me a thread of messages where Sloane asked whether he would provide financial support if a paternity test proved he was the father. In another, she complained that Ethan was taking too long to finalize the divorce. Then I saw a sentence that made my skin turn cold. "Once Claire signs, I will have the condo and access to the stock. After that, the paternity question becomes manageable." I looked up at him, bewildered. "She knows the intimate details of the settlement. Apparently, Ethan gave her confidential legal documents." "I do not know how," he admitted. "I did. He had either shown her the proposal or allowed her to dictate the very terms that were supposed to be our private path to separation." The humiliation I endured at the mediation had not been a spontaneous act of cruelty. Sloane had walked into that room knowing exactly what I was being pressured to surrender. "Why are you telling me this now?" Lucas stared blankly through the window. "Because I went to Ethan's apartment this morning. I planned to tell him the truth." "What stopped you?" I pressed. "Sloane was there," he replied, his voice barely audible. "They were arguing about what? I could not hear everything through the door. But she said you were refusing to cooperate and that he needed to make the financial situation unbearable for you." My fingers tightened around my coffee cup until my knuckles turned white. She said if he stopped paying the mortgage and challenged your claim to the stock, you would finally sign the papers and go away quietly. I thought of Ethan asking me to just get through the mediation, not resolve it, not understand it, just get through it. Did Ethan agree? He told her his attorney was handling the pressure, Lucas said. Lucas finally looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. That is when I realized he was not just being manipulated. He was helping her manipulate you. The distinction mattered more than I could have imagined. For a few hours after learning the baby might not be Ethan's, I could have made the mistake of seeing him as another victim. He was not. Sloane had lied to him. He had lied to me. Both truths could exist without canceling each other out. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my tone sharp. "I want a paternity test," he said. "That is between you, Sloane and Ethan," I replied firmly. "She will not agree unless she is forced," Lucas insisted. "Then speak to an attorney," I told him. "I have, and my attorney says I may need to wait until the baby is born unless Sloane consents. But Ethan should know before he makes permanent decisions." "He should." Lucas hesitated. "I thought it would be better if he heard it from both of us." "No, Claire. I am not standing beside you while you confess to sleeping with my husband's mistress. I am not responsible for making the truth easier for either of you," I said. "I understand," he whispered. "Do you?" I leaned forward, my gaze piercing. "You watched Ethan destroy our marriage. You knew Sloane had been involved with you, and you said nothing. You waited until she became pregnant and threatened your future before developing a conscience. His face tightened, muscles twitching. That is fair, he said. No, it is not. Fair would have been telling the truth before I spent months wondering what was wrong with me, before I questioned my own sanity. I am sorry, he said. Sorry is what people say when the consequences finally reach them, I replied. He absorbed that without argument. Just standing there. I stood up. Send every original file to Denise. Do not edit, crop, or rename anything. Include the metadata and full message threads. You believe me? He asked. I believe evidence, I said. What are you going to do? What I should have done when Ethan first lied. I buttoned my coat, feeling a strange, cold resolve. I am going to stop treating this like a broken marriage and start treating it like an investigation. By 8 o'clock that night, Denise, my forensic accountant, and I were seated at the dining table in my Lincoln Park house. Walter, my dog, lay under the table. June paced between the kitchen and the front window, sensing the tension in the room. Denise reviewed Lucas's messages while the accountant, Sam Patel, examined the documents from Ethan's incomplete financial disclosure. This changes the leverage, Denise said. It does not change the law, I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. No, but it changes his judgment. A man hiding assets for a mistress may behave differently after learning she has been lying about paternity. I do not want to reconcile, I stated clearly. I did not suggest it. I need everyone to understand that. Denise closed the message file, looking at me intently. We understand, she said. Sam turned his laptop toward us, his face grim. The condominium deposit came from the joint investment account, he explained. That part is clear. But I found another transfer. The screen showed a payment of $96,000 to Mercer Brand Advisory LLC. Sloane has a consulting company. She registered it in Delaware 8 months ago. Ethan employs her full-time at his firm. Yes, Sam said. Who paid the money? I asked. Sam enlarged the transaction detail. The funds had come from a line of credit secured against our investment portfolio. The authorization carried Ethan's digital signature. What was the stated purpose? I asked. Strategic consulting, Sam replied. For whom? Sam opened the attached memorandum. The consulting work was supposedly related to a private medical investment partnership called Northline Ventures. I had never heard of it. Search the corporate records, I commanded. I did, Sam said. Northline Ventures was formed 5 months ago. Ethan is the manager. Denise looked at me, her expression unreadable. Did he disclose ownership? No, Sam shook his head. It is not in the financial affidavit. The room became very quiet, the air thick with the implications. The pregnancies was not the only secret Ethan had hidden inside our marriage. He had created a company during our marriage, borrowed against marital assets, paid Sloane's shell company, and omitted all of it from sworn financial disclosures. That was not merely dishonest. It was calculated. Depending on what the funds had been used for, it could be sanctionable, possibly worse. Can we trace where Sloane moved the money? I asked, my mind racing through legal avenues. Not without discovery or a subpoena. Denise noted. Then we request both, I said. Denise nodded. And we seek an emergency order preventing further transfers. I looked toward the kitchen, where a framed photograph from our 7th anniversary still sat beside the wine rack. In the picture, Ethan was kissing my temple on a boat in Lake Michigan. His arms were around me. My eyes were closed in peace. For months, I had wondered when he stopped loving me. Now, I wondered whether that was the wrong question entirely. Maybe love had not disappeared all at once. Maybe he had simply decided his desires deserved protection and I did not. File it tomorrow, I said. The next morning, Denise's litigation team prepared an emergency motion to freeze the line of credit, preserve the investment accounts, and prohibit either spouse from transferring marital assets outside ordinary living expenses. We included the condominium deposit, the undisclosed company, the payment to Sloane's entity, and the settlement proposal designed to make me waive claims before those assets were revealed. We did not include the paternity evidence. However, that was personal leverage, not financial evidence, and I refused to use an unborn child as a litigation tactic, even against someone who had betrayed me so thoroughly. By noon, the judge granted a temporary preservation order pending a hearing. At 12:17, Ethan called me. I let it ring. He called again and again. Then came a message. What did you do? I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. For 9 years, he had known that I built legal cases for a living. He had simply never imagined I might build one against him. I replied, I prevented you from spending more marital money without disclosure. His answer appeared almost immediately. You are freezing funds needed for my child. I wrote back, your child is not a financial exemption from the truth. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, and returned. Then he called again. This time I answered, my voice ice cold. What is Northline Ventures? He went silent for a moment. Claire, it is complicated, he said. Complicated is what dishonest people call facts they have not prepared to explain. I shot back. It is an investment project funded by our assets. I intended to repay everything, he insisted. You paid Sloane's company $96,000. I reminded him. She provided legitimate consulting. She works for Hien. This was separate, he argued. Did Hien approve it? Another silence. Ethan, no, he admitted. Did you disclose the relationship to your company? You know, I did not, he said. Did you disclose Northline to your attorney? I was going to. Before or after I signed away the stock. He spat back. His voice sharpened. You are trying to destroy me because I left. No, I am trying to keep you from destroying me because you left, I countered. That is not what is happening. You brought the woman you cheated with to a confidential divorce mediation, I continued, my voice shaking with restrained anger. She mocked my miscarriages using information only you could have given her. Then you expected me to surrender hundreds of thousands of dollars while you hid a company and moved money into her control. She should not have said that, he whispered. But you told her, I reminded him. I was trying to explain what we had been through, he said. You gave her my grief so she could understand you. That is not fair, I said. Neither was burying 2 pregnancies and then watching you build a nursery with someone else, he countered. His breathing changed for a moment. The anger disappeared from his voice, replaced by a hollow tone. Claire, I never wanted to hurt you this badly, he said. People love saying that after carefully selecting every action required to do it, I retorted. He whispered, my name. But I ended the call. That evening, Lucas sent a new message. Sloane is planning a celebration Friday night at the Langham. Ethan's executives, clients, and several people from your firm are invited. I knew about the event. A junior associate had shown me the digital invitation earlier that day. A new beginning. It read, Ethan and Sloane invite you to celebrate their growing family and the next chapter of their lives. It was not officially called an engagement party or a baby shower, but the implication of their public announcement was clear for everyone to see. Their relationship existed in that fragile, distorted space where Ethan was still technically married, and Sloane craved the legitimacy of public recognition without the weight of public criticism. The guest list for tonight was designed to bridge that gap. If they could pack the room with respected, high-status professionals, they could manufacture a reality where the affair was scrubbed clean and transformed into a sophisticated love story. Maya called me the moment she received her invitation, her voice sharp with a mix of disbelief and tactical curiosity. She had already noticed that Sloane hadn't just invited colleagues. She had invited half the company. It was not the entire company, I realized. It was the specific people whose validation she desperately needed to secure her new status. Are you going? Maya asked, her tone hovering somewhere between concern and a craving for gossip. I told her no, but my voice lacked the conviction she expected. You sound like you might actually go, she pressed. I insisted again that I would not, but my refusal sounded like a lawyer hedging during a discovery phase. The final answer still under review. I almost smiled at the irony. Has the compliance team finally learned about Northline? I asked. Not from me, she replied. Do you know Patricia Ross? The chief financial officer. Why? She approved some of Ethan's regional budgets. Maya lowered her voice, the static on the line sharpening. Claire, what exactly did you find? I cannot discuss the details right now, I said, keeping my tone professional. You just asked whether the chief financial officer approved something, she countered. I asked whether you knew her character. I clarified. Yes, she is disciplined, sharp, and not easily intimidated. That was all I needed to hear. After we hung up, I sat alone and reviewed the files Lucas had left for me once more. One specific receipt caught my eye, a bill from an exclusive resort in Wisconsin that had been charged directly to a corporate account for a house expense. The date of the charge aligned perfectly with a weekend. Ethan had claimed he was attending a mandatory leadership retreat in Indianapolis. The hotel reservation documentation clearly listed Sloan as the second guest in the room. The expense description was a masterpiece of corporate deceit, simply labeled as a regional dermatology campaign planning session. I forwarded the information to Sam, my contact. Within an hour, he had cross-referenced the dates and uncovered 4 identical charges hidden deep within Ethan's reimbursement records, totaling more than $31,000 of unauthorized spending. Some of these expenditures had been approved under Ethan's own executive authority to bypass scrutiny. However, one of them carried the electronic approval of Patricia Ross herself. That did not necessarily mean Patricia had knowingly authorized a romantic getaway for Ethan and his mistress. High-level expense approvals in such massive companies often involved summaries rather than itemized receipts. But the implication remained the same: corporate money. The company's capital had been funneled directly into the affair. The line between Ethan's personal betrayal and a major corporate compliance violation had officially been crossed. The situation had shifted. Ethan's personal betrayal was now a quantifiable corporate compliance failure. The next morning, I requested a formal meeting with Patricia through outside counsel. I did not make threats against the company, nor did I spin a dramatic tale. I simply provided her attorneys with the mountain of expense records, the Northline documentation, and clear evidence that Sloan had been receiving substantial outside payments from an executive who supervised her entire career path. The facts spoke for themselves, far more effectively than any emotional outburst ever could have. Patricia's attorneys were cold, asking whether I intended to take this information to the media. I said, no. I intend to preserve the evidence and protect my financial rights. Whatever Ethan did is the company's responsibility to handle. Patricia called me herself that afternoon. Her voice was perfectly controlled, stripped of any warmth. Miss Bennett, I appreciate your discretion in this matter. I am not doing this for the company, I replied. I understand, she said, her voice dropping an octave. Has Ethan been informed of this yet? I asked. Not yet, she replied. Then I suggest you secure your internal records before he becomes aware of the investigation. That process is already underway, she assured me. She paused, and the air in the room felt suddenly heavier. There may be more here than you currently realize, she added. What is that supposed to mean? I asked. I cannot discuss an internal review, she replied quickly. You called me, I reminded her. I called to tell you that any documents relevant to your divorce proceedings will be preserved, she concluded. That is not the real reason you called, I said, sensing the shift in her demeanor. Another long pause followed. You are right, she admitted, her tone lowered, becoming almost conspiratorial. I called because Friday night's event is being held in a ballroom, reserved through the executive hospitality account. I closed my eyes, the reality settling in like lead. The company is actually paying for this party. The reservation was officially logged as a regional investor dinner. The audacity of it was almost elegant in its sheer scale of arrogance. Ethan and Sloan's planned to celebrate replacing me in a luxury ballroom paid for by his employer, using an event code specifically reserved for investors, all while pressuring me to surrender marital assets, because they claimed they needed the money for the baby. Will the company cancel it? I asked. Not yet, she said. Why not? Because our internal investigation is not complete. The answer sounded perfectly official, the kind of corporate boilerplate intended to shut down further questioning. The silence behind her words, however, told a different story. You intend to observe who attends and what is represented, I realized. I did not say that, she replied instantly. You did not need to, I answered. I ended the call, a plan already crystallizing in my mind. I would attend the event, but not to scream, not to destroy furniture, and certainly not to throw wine. I had seen enough legal disputes fall apart because people confused emotional spectacle with true power. I would bring the evidence, present it quietly, and let everyone else in that room decide what it meant for their own reputations. Friday night, I wore a simple, elegant black dress with long sleeves and a clean neckline. I had originally bought it for a charity dinner that Ethan and I never attended because he claimed to be sick. I wondered now, with a cold clarity, whether he had been with Sloane that night. 2. Denise arrived at my house at 6:30, carrying 2 folders that felt like the end of a long, painful chapter. The first folder contained copies of the damning financial records. The second held the signed court order freezing the disputed accounts. "You do not have to do this," she said, watching me closely. "I know that public exposure can become completely unpredictable." She made it public the moment she decided to invite my colleagues. I said, "Then keep your objective narrow," she advised. "The truth is narrow enough," I replied. Denise raised an eyebrow, a slight smile touching her lips. "The truth is usually the widest, most dangerous object in the room," she corrected. Lucas was waiting for us in the hotel lobby. He looked significantly older than he had just 4 days earlier. "Did you tell Rebecca?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "How did she respond?" "She said the fact that I was finally telling the truth now did not erase the years I spent lying to her." "She is right," I said. "I know," he whispered. "Are you still willing to go up there and speak the truth?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "You understand this will fundamentally affect your career and your reputation." I warned him. "Yes," he said. "And if you try to minimize your role in this, I will correct you in front of everyone there," I added. He nodded, accepting the terms. "I deserve that," he said. The ballroom doors opened at 7:05. White flowers covered every table, and a champagne wall stood near the entrance as if to toast a triumph. A large screen displayed photographs of Ethan and Sloane walking beside the lake, laughing in a restaurant, and holding a pair of tiny, expensive baby shoes. The final slide read, "A new family, a new future." More than 70 people filled the room, a curated audience of professional peers. Executives from the company stood near the bar, and several of Ethan's regional directors were seated close to the stage. Maya stood beside Patricia Ross, whose expression revealed absolutely nothing. I recognized 3 senior partners from my own firm in the crowd. Sloane had invited them intentionally, a calculated power move to ensure they were present. She wanted the people who respected me professionally to witness my replacement personally. When I walked into the room, the conversations nearest the door simply faded away. Ethan saw me first. He was wearing a sharp navy suit, his left hand bare. No wedding ring in sight. Sloane stood beside him in a shimmering pale gold dress, one hand resting protectively on her stomach, wearing a smile that was practiced and thin. "Clarier, I did not expect you to come," she said, her voice carrying over the silence. "That is exactly why I came," I replied. Ethan stepped between us, his posture tense. "This is not the place for a scene," he hissed. "You invited my law partners," I pointed out. "I did not," Sloane said, her smile remaining fixed in place. "I just thought that mature people could support everyone moving forward in our lives." I looked around the ballroom, scanning the guests. "You reserved a public audience," I said. "I assumed you wanted a public conversation." Her eyes flicked toward the folders in Denise's hands, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "What is that?" she asked. "A gift." The event coordinator approached the stage and announced that Ethan would be making a toast. He touched Sloane's back, guiding her toward the microphone with a practiced hand. That familiar gesture, which once meant so much to me, looked like a hollow, rehearsed performance now. Ethan thanked the guests for attending, his voice booming through the sound system. He spoke at length about unexpected chapters, the necessity of courage, and the importance of choosing love even when life became complicated. He never once used the word affair. He simply referred to the brutal destruction of our marriage as a complication. Then he looked at Sloane, and she smiled up at him, with tears shining perfectly in her eyes. "For the first time in my life," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a sincere register, "I feel absolutely certain about where I belong." I began walking toward the stage, and the room shifted around me as heads turned. Sloane noticed me first, her expression tightening instantly. "Claire," Ethan said into the microphone, his voice wavering. I stopped directly below the stage, looking up at them. "You invited all these people here to celebrate a future built with my money, your employer's eyes money, and a baby whose father you have never even verified," I said clearly. Not a single person moved. Ethan's face drained of color, leaving him looking sickly under the stage lights. Sloane's hand dropped from her stomach as if she had been burned. "That is disgusting," she snapped. "How dare you question my child?" "I am not questioning your child," I said, holding her gaze. "I am questioning you." Lucas stepped out from the crowd and moved into the center aisle. Ethan stared at him, confused and angry. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Lucas looked at Sloane, then back at Ethan, finally telling the truth, even if it was far too late. Sloane moved away from the microphone, her confidence fracturing. "Do not do this," she pleaded. Lucas climbed onto the stage, ignoring her. "I was in with Sloane long before she ever began seeing Ethan," he announced. The room erupted into a wave of whispers, the sound of a reputation collapsing. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he looked at the man he had once considered a rival. "What do you mean involved?" he asked. "I mean, we had a full affair," Lucas said, his voice steady. Rebecca's name seemed to pass through the room like a ghost. Lucas continued. "It did not end when she told you it ended." Ethan turned toward Sloane, his confusion turning into a dangerous, slow-burning rage. She shook her head quickly, eyes wide. "He is obsessed with me," she lied. "He has been threatening me for months now." Lucas took out his phone, holding it up. "I brought the original messages," he said. Sloane reached for the microphone to cut him off, but Denise signaled to the event technician. The giant screen behind them changed instantly. The photograph of the baby's shoes disappeared. An ultrasound image appeared in its place, clinical and undeniable. Beneath it were Sloane's own words from a private chat. "Look at that forehead," she had written. "It is exactly like yours. Do not tell Ethan yet. I need more time to decide which future makes the most sense." Ethan stared at the screen, his entire world visibly crumbling. Sloane's voice suddenly came through the ballroom speakers, perfectly clear. "Ethan is stable," she had said in the recording. "He wants the baby. Biology is not the only thing that makes someone a father," she had continued. "Let him believe whatever makes everyone's life easier." The recording ended, leaving a vacuum of silence in the room. A glass struck the floor near the bar and shattered. Sloane grabbed Ethan's arm, panic finally taking over. "It is edited," she cried out. Lucas unlocked his phone and held it up for everyone to see. "The original file is right here," he said. "Full metadata, full message thread." She looked toward the guests, scanning the crowd as if searching for a single person willing to rescue her from this ruin. No one moved. Ethan pulled his arm away as if she were contagious. "When were you with him?" Ethan asked, his voice deathly quiet. "Ethan, listen to me," she begged. "When?" he roared. "It was before us," she insisted. Lucas stepped forward. "The last time was around the possible conception date," he said. Ethan stumbled back from her, reeling from the weight of the realization. For the first time, the powerful executive who could dominate a conference room with one look seemed completely unable to find enough air to breathe. Sloane pointed a shaking finger at me. "She planned this," she shrieked. "She is trying to destroy us just because you chose me." "No," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You planned this event because you wanted witnesses to your victory. To my humiliation. I only changed what they were forced to witness." Patricia Ross stood up from her table. "Stop the presentation," she ordered. Her voice carried across the room with the absolute authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. For one fleeting second, Sloane looked relieved, thinking she was being saved. Then Patricia turned toward the screen technician, her face like stone. "Open the second file I provided," she commanded. Ethan stared at her, terrified. "What second file?" he asked. Patricia faced him, her eyes cold. The file showed the cost of the celebration. Every dollar tracked with clinical precision. It became clear that this relationship and Ms. Mercer's private business ventures were bankrolled by funds that did not belong to either of them. The second file I opened contained only a spreadsheet, no scandalous photographs, no incriminating messages, no emotional recordings. Just cold, hard data, dates, account numbers, specific approval codes, expense categories, and precise dollar amounts. In my professional experience, these dry numbers were far more dangerous than any headline. Patricia began walking toward the stage, and the assembled guests parted to let her through. Sloane's face went completely still, a mask of forced composure. Ethan looked from the spreadsheet to Patricia, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What is this?" he asked. "This," Patricia replied, "is a preliminary summary of the transactions identified during an internal compliance review." "You opened an investigation without even speaking to me," Ethan stammered. We began preserving records after receiving credible evidence of undisclosed conflicts and improper business expenses, Patricia countered. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. You reported me, he accused. I provided documents relevant to my divorce proceedings, I replied evenly. Your company simply decided what those documents meant. Patricia then pointed toward the first group of questionable charges listed. 4 separate resort stays were submitted as regional campaign planning sessions. Patricia noted. Ms. Mercer was the only other attendee listed in the hotel records. Ethan's jaw tightened, his voice defensive. Work was performed during those trips, he insisted. Then you will have an ample opportunity to produce that work product for us, Patricia replied. Sloane stepped forward, trying to interject. There were strategy discussions, she claimed, her voice thin. Where are the presentations? Patricia asked. We spoke informally, Sloane stammered. Where are the notes, the schedules, the campaign drafts, or even the follow-up emails? Sloane glanced toward Ethan, but he had no answer to give her. Patricia continued, turning to the room. This ballroom was reserved using Hyan's executive hospitality account and was classified as an investor relations dinner. The entire room went quiet. A low murmur spread through the guests. Several who had been holding champagne glasses placed them on nearby tables, suddenly feeling the weight of the air. Ethan turned toward the event coordinator, desperate. I told my assistant this was private, he snapped. Patricia did not blink. Your assistant has already provided the original request, she said. It instructed her to label the event as an investor dinner, because the private event limit would have required additional corporate approval. The words landed slowly, sinking into the consciousness of everyone present. This was no longer just a messy marital scandal. It was clear. Documented evidence of malicious intent. Sloane's voice sharpened, her defensive instincts kicking in. Ethan handled the reservation, she insisted. I had absolutely nothing to do with it. Patricia looked at her. You sent the guest list from your own company email, she stated. You requested reimbursement for floral arrangements under engagement. Sloane glanced toward the towering white arrangement surrounding the stage. In the harsh lighting, the flowers suddenly looked less like decoration and more like evidence in a deposition. Ethan stepped down from the stage. His face flushed. This is becoming entirely inappropriate, he declared. We can discuss these accounting issues in private. You chose to hold this event in public, Patricia reminded him. You invited Hyan employees and vendors under a misleading classification. Privacy is no longer solely your decision to make, Patricia said. Ethan lowered his voice, trying to regain authority. I am your regional vice president, he reminded me. You are just an employee under investigation. The room went dead silent. Ethan had always depended on his titles: husband, executive, provider, future father. In less than 10 minutes, every single title had been stripped of the absolute certainty he had always attached to it. He turned to me, his eyes full of cold frustration. What do you want, Claire? It was the same tired question he asked whenever my resistance interfered with his plans. What do you want? He spoke as though fairness were a mere petty desire, as though the truth were a demand I had simply invented. I want you to stop pretending this is something that happened to you, I replied. His face tightened, his temper fraying at the edges. You knew nothing about the corporate expenses, he insisted. I knew about the condominium deposit, the line of credit, the Northline Ventures account, and the secret payment to Sloane's company, I told him. Every executive in the ballroom seemed to lean in, hanging on every word. Patricia looked toward me. The payment was $96,000, she added. Yes, Sloane interrupted, voice brittle. That was entirely legitimate consulting income. For what work? Patricia asked, her tone clinical. Healthcare branding performed for Northline Ventures, Sloane replied. Patricia turned to Ethan. Northline was not disclosed in your annual conflict statement, she observed. It is not an active entity, Ethan argued. It borrowed against marital assets and transferred money to an employee under your direct authority, Patricia countered. It was clearly a personal investment vehicle. That is precisely why it required formal disclosure, Patricia insisted. Ethan looked at Sloane, panicked. You told me the consulting structure was legal, he said. It is, she insisted. You said outside counsel reviewed it, Ethan muttered. They did, she snapped. Which counsel? She hesitated, and that silence answered the question for everyone. I was going to have it reviewed. he said. You told me it already was, Ethan replied. Sloane's expression shifted. Until that moment, she had directed most of her anger toward me and Lucas. Now, a sharp edge of it turned toward Ethan. Do not stand there pretending you were not involved, she lashed out. You created Northline to invest in private healthcare companies and to move money around without Claire controlling every single decision. Several people in the room turned their gaze toward me. But I didn't flinch. I remained perfectly still. Ethan stepped closer to her, his voice low. You said the money would be used for research, he whispered. It was used to establish my consulting business. Sloane corrected him. You bought a car with it. I needed transportation, she countered. You already had a car, Ethan said. You promised me security. The argument became intimate in the ugliest way imaginable. They were no longer protecting each other from the room. They were exposing each other to it, tearing down the last shred of their shared delusion. Sloane pointed toward me. She controlled every account, every property, every decision. She shouted. You said you were tired of asking permission to use money you earned. I looked at Ethan, my expression unreadable. For months, he had described these hidden transfers as money needed for the baby. Now, the pathetic truth was finally laid bare. The secrecy had begun long before the pregnancy. I realized Northline had not been created to support a child. It had been created to remove marital assets from my view entirely. Ethan's attorney, who had been standing near the back, approached him and whispered a frantic warning. Ethan shook his head vigorously. No, I am not leaving, he hissed. His attorney whispered again, more urgent this time. Ethan ignored him and turned to face me. You make it sound criminal to want financial independence, he spat. Financial independence does not require a secret company funded by our joint assets, I said. I earned most of that money, and I supported your career while building my own, he claimed. You always needed to be in control, I countered. I needed you to disclose transactions in a divorce, he said. You froze everything. I froze the accounts you used to hide illegal transfers, I corrected him. Sloane laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. This is exactly what she does. Ethan, she said. She turns everything into an argument because she has to win. I looked at her directly. You entered a relationship with a married man, continued sleeping with his best friend, hid uncertain paternity, accepted marital funds, and charged your party to your employer. I listed. You are not losing an argument, Sloane. You are simply encountering the consequences of your own decisions. Her eyes flashed with sudden rage. You think you are better than me because you have a law degree and a house, she asked. No, I replied, stepping closer. I think I behaved better than you. She looked as though I had struck her physically. People like Sloane always expected judgment to arrive as jealousy. Jealousy could be dismissed as weakness, a simple flaw of the heart. Accountability, however, was much harder to escape. Lucas stood near the edge of the stage, pale but surprisingly steady. Ethan turned toward him, his eyes burning. How long? He asked. Lucas did not pretend to misunderstand the question. 7 months before she became involved with you, he said, then 2 times afterward. You were my best friend. Ethan choked out. I know you stood in my wedding. I know you came to my house, Ethan said, his voice rising. I know, Ethan shoved him hard. Lucas stumbled backward into a chair, caught off guard. Several people moved forward, but Lucas raised one hand to stop them. Do not touch him, he said. Ethan tried to advance again. His face twisted. Patricia's security director stepped between them with authority. Mr. Caldwell, stop, he commanded. Ethan's chest rose and fell in jagged, uneven breaths. You let me believe the baby was mine, Ethan rasped. Lucas's voice finally broke under the pressure. I was afraid, he admitted. You were afraid, Ethan mocked. Yes, Lucas said. I left my wife. And you chose to leave Claire before I told you anything. The words stopped. Ethan, Lucas continued, his voice steadying. I should have told you. I should have told Rebecca. I should have told Claire the moment I realized the timelines overlapped. I failed all of you, Lucas whispered. Sloane stared at him, disgusted. Do not try to make yourself noble, she snapped. I am not, Lucas replied. You wanted me to leave Ethan, she said. I wanted the truth, Lucas countered. You wanted access to the baby, she hissed. If the baby is mine, I have a responsibility, Lucas said. You have no idea what responsibility means. A voice called out. Rebecca Grant stood at the back of the ballroom, Lucas froze, his entire posture stiffening. Rebecca Grant stood near the doors in a dark green coat. She looked tired, composed, and completely uninterested in the spectacle unfolding in front of her. Lucas whispered her name. "I told you not to contact me tonight," she said. "I did not." Lucas stammered. "I came because Patricia called me." Patricia gave a slight, acknowledging nod. Rebecca was a physician who had served as a medical advisor to Heian. Her professional connection explained the invitation, but her personal connections changed the room entirely. Sloane stepped back, suddenly looking small. Rebecca looked at Lucas. "You told them?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "All of it?" she asked. "Yes, including the hotel trips during our separation," he said. "And the trips before I moved out," she pressed. Lucas closed his eyes. "Yes, that was another truth he had not given me in the coffee shop earlier." He and Rebecca had not been fully separated when the affair began. She nodded once, absorbing the confirmation she had probably expected all along. Then she looked at Sloane. "I am not here to compete with you," she said. "I am not here to defend him, either. I came because if a child may be involved, every adult in this room needs to stop using that uncertainty as a weapon." Sloane instinctively touched her stomach, looking defensive. "This stress is dangerous," she murmured. Rebecca's expression remained calm and detached. "Then leave, contact your physician, and arrange proper testing through legal counsel," she advised. "But do not invoke the baby every time someone asks you a direct question." For the first time that entire evening, Sloane seemed completely unable to produce a clever answer. Her hand remained protectively over her stomach. I often wondered whether she truly loved the child, or if it was just another pawn in her desperate game. I believed she did love, in whatever fractured way she understood the concept. That made the situation infinitely sadder, not simpler. An innocent child was coming into the world surrounded by adults who had treated truth like something negotiable. Patricia stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension as she addressed Ethan and Sloane. "Effective immediately. Both of you are placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. You are not permitted to access any Heian systems, facilities, or internal records," she stated firmly. Ethan stared at her, his jaw tightening in disbelief. "You cannot suspend me in front of my own team," he snapped. Patricia did not flinch. "I can suspend you wherever I locate you after determining that company funds and employee safety may be at risk," she replied. "I built the Midwest Division," he argued. "You were paid to build it," Patricia countered. "I delivered 4 years of record growth, and that performance will be weighed alongside your conduct." Sloane scanned the room, her eyes darting between the stunned guests. "You are all enjoying this," she whispered, her voice laced with bitterness. No one answered. The silence was heavy, suffocating. She focused her gaze on me. "This is exactly what you wanted," she accused. "You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone." "I wanted you to stop humiliating me," I said evenly. "You could have handled this privately," she spat. "You invited my partners just to watch you celebrate with my husband. You did not have to come." I noted. "No," she admitted. "I chose to." Her voice shook with a toxic mixture of rage and insecurity. "You are jealous, because I am giving him what you never could," she sneered. This sentence was crueler than anything else she had said, striking at the deepest, oldest wound I carried. But, surprisingly, it no longer controlled me. I looked over at Ethan. He quickly lowered his eyes, unable to meet my gaze. Then, I looked back at Sloane. I had spent years believing that losing those pregnancies made me fundamentally less complete, less of a woman in the eyes of the world. Ethan knew that instead of protecting that wound, he had chosen to share it with you, I said, my voice steady. "You used my pain because you thought motherhood made you untouchable." Her expression shifted slightly. Though it was not remorse, it was uncertainty. "I would never blame an innocent child for the circumstances of their conception," I continued, keeping my tone detached. "But carrying a child does not erase the wreckage you have left behind, nor does it absolve you for what you have done to other people. It does not make cruelty maternal," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "It does not make theft into security. It does not turn lies into a family." Sloane's eyes filled with tears, whether from rage or shame. I could not tell. She grabbed her purse from the table with trembling hands. "I am leaving," she announced. Patricia's security director stepped aside to clear a path. "No one is preventing you," he stated. Sloane stopped near the stage, What about the files? You will surrender your company laptop and access card before exiting, I reminded her. This is unbelievable. No, Patricia said. It is simply documented. Sloane reached into her purse, removed the access badge, and threw it onto the table with a sharp clatter. She walked out of the ballroom without looking back at Ethan. He did not follow her. That simple fact surprised everyone, including him. For months, he had chosen her every single time the choice cost me something, regardless of the destruction it left in our wake. Now, when the cost became his own, he simply stood still, paralyzed by the weight of his own decisions. The ballroom began to empty slowly. Some guests left quickly, clearly embarrassed by the extent of the spectacle they had witnessed. Others lingered near Patricia, whispering, offering information, or asking if they should preserve their emails for the investigation. My law partners approached me, their faces grave. The senior partner, Martin Ellis, looked at the folders Denise was holding. "Do you need the firm involved in this?" he asked. "No," I replied. "Are you certain?" he pressed. "Yes, I am sure." He studied me for a long moment, a hint of respect in his tired eyes. "You handled yourself well tonight," he offered. "I should never have needed to be in this position in the first place," I admitted. "No," he nodded solemnly. "You should not have." Maya stepped forward and hugged me without asking. I nearly collapsed when she did, not because I was weak, but because it was the first contact that evening that did not demand anything from me. When she finally released me, Denise stepped forward and handed Ethan's attorney a thick, sealed envelope. Ethan watched, his expression turning wary. "What is that?" he asked. "Service copies of the amended divorce petition, the financial preservation order, and detailed discovery requests concerning Northline Ventures," Denise said calmly. "You serve me at this party?" Ethan asked, incredulous. "The original documents were delivered to your residence earlier this afternoon," Denise replied. "These are just courtesy copies for your immediate review." For the first time that night, a genuine smile touched my lips. It was Khan's eyes choice his humiliation, but because his desperate attempts to outmaneuver me had finally ended. He had expected this party to certify his new life before our old one had been legally dismantled. Instead, he left the room holding the first complete, written description of what dismantling our marriage would actually cost him in the end. Ethan waited until almost everyone was gone before he finally approached me. The screen behind him was blank, the festive display reduced to nothing. The flowers remained, smelling heavy and cloying in the empty air. The pair of baby shoes sat abandoned near the microphone, a lonely sight. "Claire," he said. I looked at him, feeling strangely detached. His face seemed older, etched with the stress of the night. "I did not know about Lucas," he said. "I believe you," I replied. "I truly thought the baby was mine." "I know," I said. "I love that child. The child still exists." He flinched at my words. "I do not know what I am supposed to do," he muttered. "You wait for the truth," I told him. "And if the baby is not mine, that is between you, Sloane, and the person who actually is the father." He looked toward the heavy ballroom doors. "I destroyed our marriage for a lie," he said. "No," I corrected him. His eyes returned to me. "You destroyed our marriage with your own lies. Her lies only destroyed the future you expected to receive in exchange for your betrayal." He pressed his lips together, his face tightening. "I was unhappy," he insisted. "You were entitled to be unhappy," I said. "I felt invisible." He continued. "You were entitled to feel invisible. I felt like nothing I did was ever enough for you. You were entitled to tell me that instead of running," I replied. His voice became raw with emotion. "Why can you not admit we were already broken before Sloane came along?" "Because being imperfect is not the same as being broken," I answered. "We barely spoke some nights. We worked too much," he said. "You did not want to try again after the miscarriages." "I could not survive another loss," I whispered. "I wanted a family," he said. "So did I replied. "You buried yourself in your work," he accused. "So did you," I countered. "At least she made me feel wanted." I let the words settle, feeling the cold sting of reality. There it was, not love, not destiny, not an uncontrollable connection. It was simple, shallow admiration. Sloane had looked at Ethan as though his success made him extraordinary. I had known him before the title, before the stock options, before the tailored suits and the hotel upgrades. I knew which stories he repeated, which decisions frightened him, and how quickly his confidence disappeared when the praise stopped coming. Being known by someone who saw through the facade had begun to feel far less exciting to him than being worshipped by someone who only saw the trophy. You did not want a new life, I said. You wanted a version of yourself that never had to feel ordinary. He looked away, his shoulders slumping. I am sorry, he said. I believe you are sorry now, I told him. I was sorry before, he said. You were sorry that I was hurt, but you were not sorry enough to stop hurting me. Can we talk after the dust settles? I mean about us, about our future. There is no us anymore, I stated firmly. You cannot know that for sure, he argued, his eyes filled with tears. And the sight moved me, but it did not change my mind. That was the crucial difference between compassion and surrender. I made a catastrophic mistake, he pleaded. I said you made a series of selfish choices, I reminded him. People come back from worse, he said. Maybe you will, I told him. With you, he asked. No, I answered. He stared at me as though total rejection had never seemed possible until that moment. What if I do everything right from now on? He asked. You cannot use good behavior like a time machine to erase the past, I said. I will leave Hien, he promised. I will sell the condo. I will return every dollar. You should return the money because it is not yours, I said. You should cooperate with Hien because you owe them the truth. You should deal honestly with Sloane because an innocent child is involved in this mess. I picked up my coat, feeling the finality of the moment. None of those things purchases me, I said. He reached for my hand, then stopped, his fingers hovering in the air before he pulled back. Claire, please do not come back to me just because the person you chose became unsafe, he whispered. That is not what this is, I said. It is exactly what this is, he insisted. He lowered his head, defeated for 9 years. I had been his certainty in a chaotic world. Sloane had been his fleeting excitement. Now that his excitement had completely collapsed, he wanted his certainty returned. But I was not a house he could simply enter after his new shelter burned down. Lucas was waiting near the lobby elevators, his posture stiff. Rebecca stood several feet away from him, her arms crossed tightly. They were not speaking. When I approached, Lucas looked at me with regret. I am sorry I did not tell you everything at the coffee shop, he said. You told me just enough to protect yourself, I said bluntly. He accepted the accusation without protest. I am going to petition for genetic testing, he said. Do it through counsel, I advised. I will, he said, if the baby is yours. Do not punish the child for the way this entire situation began. I warned. I will not, he promised. And do not use fatherhood as evidence that you have changed, I added, his brow furrowed. What do you mean? He asked. Changing is what you do consistently, when no one is looking, and no one is applauding. Signing legal papers and posting photographs will be the easy part, I said. Rebecca looked at me, a flicker of agreement in her eyes. That is true, she said. Lucas nodded, looking lost. I understand, he said. No, Rebecca said coldly. You understand the sentence. But the rest of this will take years to fix. The elevator arrived with a ping. Rebecca stepped inside alone. Lucas did not follow her. I drove home through streets glazed with ice. When I opened the front door, Walter and June came running to greet me. June pressed her body against my legs, whining softly. Walter barked until I sat on the hardwood floor and allowed him to climb halfway into my lap. Despite being far too large for such things, I buried my face in his thick fur. That was when I finally cried. I had not cried at the mediation. Not when I heard Sloane's recording. And not when Patricia suspended Ethan. I cried on the floor while 2 rescue dogs leaned against me, as if their bodies could hold together every part of me that had finally become too tired to remain composed. I cried for the pregnancies I had lost, the future I thought I had, and the years I had spent believing that endurance was the same as devotion. I cried for the woman who had smelled perfume on her husband's shirt and apologized for even asking questions. Then, I made tea, removed the wedding photograph from the kitchen, and slept for 9 hours. The weeks that followed were much quieter than the party, but they were far more consequential in the grand scheme of my life. Hien's internal investigation found that Ethan had approved Sloane's promotion without ever disclosing their personal relationship to the board. It also uncovered improper expense classifications, consistent misuse of executive hospitality funds, and outside payments that created a direct, damning conflict of interest. Sloane claimed she had believed Ethan's assistant handled the appropriate approvals and oversight. Email records, however, showed that she knew exactly what was happening. She resigned before Hyan could complete the full disciplinary process. Ethan was offered the option to resign instead of being terminated for cause. He accepted the deal. The company required repayment of more than $47,000 in personal expenses. The Northline transaction eventually became part of our divorce discovery, under strict court supervision. Sloan returned $61,000 that remained in her business account. The remainder of our funds had vanished into a vehicle, upscale furniture for the condo, and a series of luxury trips. During the settlement, Ethan's portion of the marital estate was significantly reduced to account for those dissipated assets. I held on to the Lincoln Park house for a few months, but every corner felt haunted by a version of myself that had spent years waiting for someone to come home. It was time to clear the slate, so I put it on the market and moved on. I bought a smaller, more intimate house in Evanston. It had a fenced yard perfect for Walter and June, a sun-drenched room facing the lake, and a kitchen that caught the morning light by 7. The divorce was finally signed and sealed 8 months after that disastrous hotel party. Ethan certainly did not get the favorable outcome he had spent so long posturing for, and the company stock we had both built during our marriage was finally divided exactly as it should have been. Every one of his hidden transfers was charged directly against his share. The contract for the West Loop condo was terminated after the court refused to unlock frozen funds for the closing. Ethan eventually moved to Columbus to take a mid-level position with a smaller medical distributor. I heard through the grapevine that he stopped wearing the expensive silver watch. Meanwhile, Sloan gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Ivy, and the chapter of my life with him finally closed. A paternity test confirmed that Lucas was indeed the biological father, though Ethan actually demanded a second test before he could bring himself to accept the truth. Once the results were undeniable, he sent me one final message, a brief, hollow apology admitting I had been right about everything. I deleted the message immediately. I had never wanted to be right about the betrayal. I just wanted to be loved. Lucas acknowledged paternity, established support, and started traveling here twice a month. Rebecca finally finished the divorce she had been putting off for far too long. We met for coffee once. Just the two of us. We never became close friends. There is a limit to what shared trauma can build, but we understood the weight of what we had survived. She told me Lucas was actually trying to be a reliable father for the first time. I told her I hoped he succeeded, and she echoed the sentiment with a look that told me she was tired of the cycle, too. She wanted it for the child's sake, not for his. Sloan reached out once through an attorney, demanding I sign a strict confidentiality agreement that would prevent me from ever discussing the hotel incident or the financial records in public. I refused. I never had any intention of selling a story to the media or posting about it on social media, but I would not allow her to purchase a silence that she would eventually characterize as proof of her own innocence. My lawyer sent a single, firm response back to her camp. Miss Bennett would continue to comply with all existing legal confidentiality obligations, but she would never agree to additional, overreaching restrictions. Sloan never reached out again. A year after the divorce, Maya invited me to speak to a group of young women who were just beginning their careers in corporate law. The original topic for the event was professional resilience, but I decided to pivot. I talked about dignity instead. I told those young women that having a brilliant mind would not protect them from loving someone dishonest. I told them that reaching the height of professional success would not prevent them from doubting their own worth. I told them that their own strength would not stop them from tolerating far too much. I emphasized that the most dangerous lies we face are not always the ones told by others, but the ones we tell ourselves to stay. I shared the lies I once told myself. I am overreacting. A good marriage requires sacrifice. If I just become easier to love, he will finally be honest. I told them dignity is rarely something dramatic or loud. It is often just a quiet, internal decision made long before anyone else understands its weight. It is the simple act of reading a document before you sign it. It is the bravery required to ask that one uncomfortable second questions when things do not add up. It is the strength to walk out of a room without needing to win the argument. It is the iron will to refuse to reopen a door just because the person on the other side finally realizes what he has lost. After the talk, A young associate came up to me and asked if I had forgiven my husband. People ask that all the time, expecting forgiveness to be the final receipt that I had fully healed. I stopped wishing for his destruction, and that felt like progress. I told her that was enough for me, but she pushed further, asking if I would ever speak to him again. I told her I speak to him only when legal or practical matters make it unavoidable. That did not sound like forgiveness to her. I explained that forgiveness does not always mean granting someone access to your life again. Sometimes, it just means you no longer carry the fire. It does not mean you invite the person who started it back into your home. The last time I actually saw Ethan was at a small coffee shop in Evanston, nearly 2 years after our mediation ended. I was sitting by the window, skimming a contract. When he walked in, he looked thinner, and there was significantly more gray in his hair. He wore a cheap, inexpensive coat I had never seen in our years together. He noticed me while he was waiting for his order, and the space between us suddenly felt heavy with the silence of our past. For a long, frozen moment, neither of us moved. Then, he finally approached my table. "Clarier," he said. I looked up. "Ethan, you look good." "So do you," he replied. It was not entirely true, but cruelty felt unnecessary now. He asked about Walter and June, and I showed him a photograph of them sleeping in the sunroom. His expression softened, and he whispered that he missed them. I told him they were doing well, and he congratulated me on making partner. "Thank you," I said, and he looked toward the empty chair across from me. "Can I sit?" "I only have a few minutes." I nodded, and he sat down. For a while, we discussed the most ordinary, superficial things imaginable. His work, the state of my house, his mother's health, the kind of trivial subjects two people discuss when they once knew every secret about each other, and now have no right to ask anything personal. It was a strange, hollow performance of normalcy. Then he broke the rhythm. "I saw a photograph of Ivy," he said. I waited. "She looks like Lucas." "I have not seen her, though Sloan sends updates occasionally." "You stayed in contact for a while," I noted. He turned his coffee cup between his hands, staring down at it. "I thought I could still be a part of the baby's life," he admitted. I had spent months imagining her as my daughter, trying to build a future out of a dream that was never going to be mine. "What happened?" I asked. Sloan did not want the complication, and Lucas did not trust my motives. Eventually, I realized I was just trying to hold on to the only part of that future that had not deliberately betrayed me. "The child did not betray you," I reminded him. "I know," his voice lowered to a whisper. "That is why I stepped away before my grief became a burden to her." It was the first time I felt he actually understood what he had done. For the first time in years, I saw evidence that Ethan might have actually learned something. It did not make me want him back, of course. It just made me hope he would become less harmful to the next person who dared to trust him. "I am sorry," he said, looking at me. "Not because Sloan lied to me, and not because I lost my job. I am sorry for what I did to you before any of that happened. Back when we were still supposed to be a team." I looked at him, and he continued. "I made you question your own instincts. I told private things about you to others just so I could make myself look wounded. I took our money and called it independence. I tried to pressure you into accepting less because I wanted my new life to begin without any consequences." His eyes were wet. "I understand now that even if Sloan had loved me, even if the baby had been mine, I still would have been wrong. That was the exact apology I had once believed I needed to survive." Hearing it did not repair the past. It just placed the naked truth where the excuses used to be. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "Do you forgive me?" he asked. I looked him in the eye. "I no longer need you to suffer," I said. "Is that forgiveness?" he asked. "It is the only version I have," I told him. He nodded slowly. "Is there any version of the future where we could try again?" The answer came without a flicker of anger. "No," he looked down at the table, perhaps realizing the truth was final. "I thought you might say that," he murmured. "You did not ask because you believed the answer had changed," I said. "You asked because you needed to confirm it for yourself." "Yes," he admitted. I closed my laptop, signaling the end of our time. "You once told me you felt invisible in our marriage," I reminded him. "I have thought about that." He looked up, vulnerable. "I know there were times I did not see you clearly," I continued. "But being unseen does not justify becoming dishonest. And being sorry does not require me to become your wife ever again." "I understand," he said. And this time, I actually believed he did. We walked outside together into the crisp air. Snow had begun falling, light enough to vanish the second it touched the pavement. At the corner, Ethan finally stopped. "You really are different," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. I shook my head. "No, I am not. I finally just stopped negotiating against myself." Then I crossed the street, leaving him behind. Walter and June were waiting for me at home. The sunroom lights were on, casting a warm glow. A case file sat unfinished on desk, and flowers I had bought for myself rested in a blue vase near the window. My life was smaller than the one we had planned. Smaller house, fewer formal dinners, no husband, no carefully staged holiday photographs to show the world how perfect we were. Yet it belonged entirely to me. I no longer checked anyone else's schedule before making plans for my own weekend. I no longer slept with a phone in my hand, waiting for a text that would break my heart. I no longer treated peace as the temporary, fragile space between suspicions. I was finally, truly free. For a long time, I believed my story ended the moment my husband chose another woman. It did not. It actually began the moment I understood that his choice did not define my value. Sloane believed a pregnancy made her the winner. Ethan believed money and status would protect him from the consequences of his own character. Lucas believed that delayed honesty could somehow erase his cowardice. All three were wrong about what mattered. The baby was not a prize to be won. The marriage was never a competition. And revenge was not the moment their lies became public. My real revenge was much quieter and more permanent. I kept my name. I kept my career. I kept the life I had almost surrendered just to make dishonest people feel comfortable. Most importantly, I kept the part of myself they had tried so hard to convince me was too cold, too ambitious, and too difficult to love. That woman was never the problem, and she was never the victim. She was simply the person who eventually saved herself from the wreckage of a life built on someone else's lies. It was a hard-won victory, but it was mine, and I would never apologize for standing tall in the ruins. I had finally learned that the most important relationship I would ever have was the one I maintained with my own integrity, and that was worth more than anything I had lost.